Yeah.
Yeah. So welcome everyone to the ESA Junior Faculty Webinar Series. As always, we are going to have two talks today. They are going to be short 20-minute presentations. They will be followed by 5-minute discussions, and then we'll have 5 minutes at the end of each talk for more questions and answers. So feel free to use the Zoom Q&A for your questions or raise your hand. We also have an after party, which have been well attended since we have been doing this. So if you have more questions or if you want to ask more questions to the speakers or the discussants, feel free to stay after. We normally stay about 15-20 minutes longer and have a more in-depth conversation at the end. So today we have Stephanie Heger as our first presenter. She is currently an assistant professor at the University of Sydney, and she'll be actually moving to the UK, and she'll be an assistant professor there, a lecturer at University of East Anglia. Today she's going to be presenting us her paper, Altruism, Begets, Altruism. Stephanie, take it away.
Okay, so I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Oh wait, I think you have to wait for you to unshare.
No, you need to unshare. Okay.
Okay, so first, my co-author isn't here to do the Q&A, so I'll just take questions, I guess, in the after party. So thank you to the organizers for putting this together. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to present even in this format. As Bilor said, I'm moving from Sydney to the University of East Anglia. I think I officially start in a month. So this is joint work with Bob Slonim from the University of Sydney in Altruism, begets, altriusm. Oops. Okay, so I just want to start with a few background facts about charitable giving for those of you who are unfamiliar with kind of the importance of charitable giving in daily life. So first, it's a large expenditure. So about 410 billion US dollars are donated to charity in the USA in 2017, and this makes up about 2% of GDP. So not only is it a big expenditure, but it also seems to be related to a lot of quality of life outcomes, and in particular health. So it's been related to happiness, as well as there's some causal evidence that charitable giving is good for overall general health. And so it's not surprising that there's a large literature looking at what motivates people to give now. So without going into a lot of the detail of each of these studies, you can think about the literature on the price of giving, the literature on efficiency concerns, or at least the salience of efficiency concerns and encouraging people to give, social pressure, as well as identity. And there's a little bit less, though, on what happens to giving later. There is some literature on this, but it's a little bit, it's much more limited. And so that's the focus of our paper today. So the question is, what effect does encouraging altruism now have on altruism later? And so what we're going to do is we're going to generate some exogenous variation in altruism now, so A1, using a default option nudge Z. And then we're also going to elicit altruism later, so in T equals 2. And one channel through which the nudge may affect altruism later is what I'll call this direct effect. And in fact, there's quite a bit of literature, not just in charitable giving, but in other pro-social settings, that there is some evidence that there's this direct effect. So there's some type of nudge or incentive to engage in pro-social behavior initially, which affects initial behavior, and then also seems to also have these positive spillover effects into future behavior. Where there's a lot less literature is on this channel that connects the behavior in T equals 1 to the behavior in T equals 2. And I'm going to call this channel a moral consistency. You might not agree with the terminology, but that's what I'm going to call it today. So this is where the nudge affects behavior in T equals 1. The nudge-induced change in behavior in T equals 1 then has a causal effect on behavior in T equals 2. And the only paper that I'm aware of that has looked at this, particularly in the charitable giving space, is actually one of Jonathan Meer's paper on the habit of giving. It's an empirical paper. Okay, so the way we're going to be thinking about this and the theory, the psychological theory we're going to be using to essentially design our experiment is this idea of self-perception theory, which dates back to Bem in 1972. And the idea with self-perception theory is that at t=2, when you're asked to engage in some type of behavior, in our case, charitable giving, you look back at your behavior at t=1 to try to infer the type of person you might be, and you use that inference to then guide your decision at t=2. Okay, so this was first a psychological theory proposed by Bem in 1972, but very much formalized for us economists by Benabou and Tirole in 2011. So there's two kind of important aspects of self-perception theory that we're going to really draw on in this paper. So the first is this idea of positive path dependence in behavior. So you can think about habit formation. And the second is this idea that choice is critical to establish the intertemporal link. And so what I mean by this is you can think about if you don't actively decide to engage in a behavior at t=1, then you don't learn so much about yourself from that behavior, right? So at t=2, when you look back at t=1, and if you didn't make an active choice to, say, give to charity, you can't really infer the type of person you are. So the idea here is that choice is critical to establish this link. And these are two things we're going to use, particularly the choice part to design our experiment. Okay, so just to give you a quick preview of our findings. So we find that our default option nudge, and of course I'm going to get into the details of the experiment probably on the next slide. Our default option nudge significantly increases charitable giving, what I'm going to say now. So we have this increase in giving now. Next, I'm going to show you that we do see these direct positive spillovers into A2, so into charitable giving in time 2, but only when there's a choice in round 1, only when there's a choice of A1, okay? So this is going to be a really critical point for us for our empirical identification strategy. And then our final kind of main result is this idea that altruism begets altruism. So we see that an increase in altruistic choices now causes an increase in altruism later. And we're going to model this with a model of habit persistence, following the ideas obviously proposed by Pollock in 1970, but also building off of Jonathan Meer's paper on the habit of giving. And our model of habit persistence is going to directly inform our empirical strategy, and we're going to be estimating a local average treatment effect. Okay, so let me give you the details of the experiment. So we have just over 1,800 subjects from Amazon Mechanical Turk. And I'm first going to describe our two main treatments, and these are what I'm going to refer to as our choice treatments. So we have people who are defaulted into keeping cash for themselves, so that's the default cash, and people who are defaulted into making a charitable donation. This is the default charity condition. And the way that these two conditions work is that when subjects entered into the experiment, entered into the survey, they saw, "Thank you for participating today. In addition to your $1 participation fee," so if they're in the default cash, they're going to be told, "We're going to give you an additional $1 bonus payment to keep for yourself." If they're in the default charity condition, again, "Thank you for participating. In addition to the $1 participation fee, we are now going to make a donation in your name, a $1.50 donation to a charity called CARE." And we tell them a little bit about CARE so they can understand what their donation is where their donation is going. We then have them think about how they might either spend their $1 if they're in the default cash condition, whereas if they're in the default charity condition, we ask them how CARE might use their $1.50 donation. And they're actually asked to list, I think it's three avenues or 3 channels through which the money might be used in both cases. And then they do some filler tasks to put a bit of time between the moment in which they're endowed with their default position and when we actually ask them to make a round 1 choice. So if they're in the default cash condition, we ask them, "Would you like to give up your $1 bonus and instead make a $1.50 donation to CARE?" And then we tell them a little bit about CARE so that they can make an informed donation. Those people in the default charity condition, they're asked, "Do you want to give up your $1.50 donation to CARE and instead keep a $1 bonus for yourself?" So this is in the choice condition where they're actually making an active choice with what to do with their money in round 1. They then go through a few more filler tasks. So I think about 10 minutes now between round 1 and round 2 on average. Of course, each subject takes a different amount of time. But the filler tasks are different types of word games, really just meant to put a space of time between a round 1 decision and a round 2 decision. In round 2, they then face a multiple price list where they choose between options 1 to 11. And as you move down the list, you're essentially giving up $10. So you're going to get another $1 bonus here in round 2, regardless of whether you're in the default cash or default charity. And then you start in option 1. It says, do you want to add $1 to your bonus and donate 0 to Save the Children? I should also mention it's a different charity in the same realm as CARE, but a different charity. And then as they move down the list, with each line, they give up 10 cents of their bonus to then donate 20 additional cents to Save the Children. So option 1, it's keep an extra $1 for myself and donate 0. At the other end of the spectrum, option 11, it's add 0 to your bonus and donate $2 to Save the Children. Okay, so this is the main design. So you can see that the round 1 donation choice is essentially opting out of or staying in your default position. And then round 2 is deciding how much you want to donate to a similar charity. Okay, so I now want to discuss a little bit about what this idea of choice. And I'm going to introduce a series of control or additional treatments. And remember, because my empirical strategy is going to be an IV strategy, and what I need to be able to convince you and myself is that a type of exclusion and restriction assumption holds. So remember that in order for the IV to be a valid approach, I need that the nudge affects the choice to donate in round 2 only through what happens in round 1. Okay, so I'm going to turn back to self-perception theory and this idea of the importance of choice to design some control conditions to help provide some evidence that this is in fact the case. And so what we're going to have are these series of control, which I'm going to call the no choice treatments. And I have 3 different variations of this to really drive home the idea, to really be really sure that the relevant aspect is the choice in round 1. So again, we're going to have default cash and default charity, but in all 3 conditions, there's essentially no active choice in round 1. So in the most restrictive form of these control conditions is what I call the no information, no choice. They enter into the experiment. They are told, if they're in the default cash, they're told, thanks for participating. Here's a $1 bonus payment for yourself. They then go right into the filler questions. Whereas if the default charity, no information, no choice, they're told, thank you for participating. In addition to your $1 participation fee, we're gonna make a $1.50 donation to CARE on your behalf. They go through all of the exact same exercises, except they never have the option to opt out of that round 1 choice. So they're essentially either forced to keep the cash or forced to donate to charity. The information no choice and the information hypothetical choice introduce a little bit some additional pieces. So in the information no choice, they're told that some people had the opportunity to either keep cash for themselves or make a donation. Whereas in the information hypothetical choice, we actually present the round 1 choice and we ask them to make a hypothetical choice that won't be binding. Okay, so this is to really be clear that the important piece is this active choice in round 1. Okay, I'll get to a little bit more on this as we get to the results. Okay, so then we also have one additional other control where they don't participate at all in round 1 and they move directly into the round 2 choice. Okay, and that's going to be called round 2 only. Okay, so the model we have in mind, in the interest of time, I'm going to speed up here, is people get utility over private consumption, which is the small u, and people get utility over making a donation, which is small v. And of course, alpha is just the parameter that governs the intensity between the two choices, between the two types of utility. So I'm introducing a functional form to each of the subutility functions, and I'm going to focus on v, the subutility v. And so what people are doing, the model that we have in mind is that they're choosing consumption in period 2 and giving in period 2, taking the choices in round 1 as given, okay? And so this parameter gamma a is going to tell us, the direction of gamma a is going to tell us in what way period 1 giving affects period 2 giving, right? So if this is a positive parameter, this is your typical habit formation, habit persistence utility function. Okay. So the first order condition that comes out of this model is essentially this, I can solve for gamma A, and it's essentially the estimand for a local average treatment effect. And so I'm going to work through both the numerator and the denominator when I go through each of my hypotheses. So first is this default option hypothesis, which is the denominator of my first order condition. And this is, the hypothesis here is simply that people who are in the default charity choice condition are going to be more likely to donate more on average. In this case, it's a 0-1 choice, are going to donate more on average in round 1 than people in the default cash condition. So this is going to just be my first stage of my IV. Okay, my next hypothesis has to do with the numerator, and what I'm citing here are is the literature that finds not just positive spillovers in terms of charitable giving, but in terms of all sorts of types of pro-social behaviors. So what this is saying is that people who are in the default charity condition are going to donate more in round 2 than people who are in the default cash condition. Okay, so I expect this to also be positive. And this is for the choice conditions only that I'm talking about here. And finally, I'm going to then show you, when we put these two things together, obviously the numerator and the denominator both being positive imply that I'm gonna have this idea of moral consistency or habit persistence. So I expect that my IV estimate will be positive. Okay, so let me, this is just some summary statistics to let you know that there's nothing odd going on here with my randomization. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump right into my results. Okay, so what I'm going to first show you is that we have a strong first stage. This is my default option hypothesis. Then I'm going to show you that we do find these positive spillovers in round 2 giving, so my numerator. But I'm going to show you that these positive spillovers only exist in the choice conditions, and that when we remove choice in round 1, we see no positive spillovers into round 2. Okay, so this is some evidence that our exclusion restriction assumption is holding in the choice conditions. And then finally, I'm going to show you my IV estimate, this idea of moral consistency, that altruism begets altruism. Okay, so quickly here, result 1. So subjects in my default charity condition are significantly more likely to donate in round 1 than my subjects in the default cash condition. So these are 95% confidence intervals. We have a very strong first stage. The next thing I want to show you is I want to show you round 2 giving separated by treatment assignment. So the picture on the left-hand side, so these are CDFs of donation amounts in round 2. And on the left-hand side, I'm showing you the choice treatments. And just to quickly summarize here, what you can see, the black dotted dashed line is my default charity choice condition. The solid blue line is my default cash choice condition. People in the default charity are giving significantly more than people in the default cash in round 2. Now, what I want to be sure, so this is evidence of a positive numerator, if you remember my first order condition. But what I want to show you here in the right-hand panel is that this positive spillover effect disappears when I remove the choice in round 1. So here, the distributions between the default charity no choice and the default cash no choice, there's no difference in the distributions. Okay. So when you remove the choice, there are no positive spillovers. So the choice is really the important part. Here, what I'm showing you are some coefficient plots from an OLS regression. And I'm showing you the relative increase in the probability in donating in round 2 for the default charity condition relative to the default cash condition for the choice. And so you can see that this is significant and positive. Whereas for the default charity no choice, when I compare it to the default cash no choice, it is not statistically significant nor positive. Okay. I want to show you one more piece that I think is important. So what I want to show you now is I want to show an interaction between default charity interacted with choice, and to show you that really it's this choice that is important. Now, what I can't show you, so essentially what I want to tell you is that this effect here is larger than this effect here, statistically significantly larger. So when I restrict it to people who gave $1 or less, remember the maximum is $2, I get a positive and significant, this is a two-tailed test, on this interaction between default charity and choice. When I start to broaden the donation amount, and I'm looking at people who donated less than 2, so these are just people who didn't donate the maximum amount in round 2, I start to lose some significance. And you can see then when I'm looking at the full sample, it's no longer statistically significant. So if you go back to the distribution, what essentially it's saying is that in this region here between 0 and 1 for the choice treatments is where most of the difference is coming from in terms of the positive spillovers. Okay, this is something I'm still kind of working on, so hopefully it becomes clearer and clearer. Okay, so my final result is my moral consistency result, and this is my IV estimate. So what I'm showing you here is I've instrumented for giving in round 1, these are just the choice treatments. I've instrumented for giving in round 1 with default, with treatment assignment in round 1. Okay, and so what we can see here is that giving in round 1, in column 1, leads to a 41 percentage point increase in the likelihood to donate in round 2, okay? And you can see relative to the baseline or the constant here, this is quite large effect. In column 2, I included some controls, and I'm getting essentially the demographic controls that we collected. I'm getting essentially the same results. I then also look at in donation amount. Remember, they can give up to $2 in round 2, and I see that giving in round 1 causes about a 60-cent increase in giving in round 2. Okay, so I've used up all of my time. So just to conclude, we look at the intertemporal effects of a nudge towards altruism, and we do find this idea of moral consistency. So altruism begetting altruism, and importantly, we find that choice is really critical to generate this positive path dependence.
Thank you, Stephanie. Now we will have Jonathan Meer from my alma mater, who's a professor there at Texas A&M University. He's going to provide us his discussion points for this talk. Jonathan?
Okay, I think I need Stephanie to not share her screen, and then I can share mine. Okay. Okay, you should be able to see my kids now, and then we can do this. There we go. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Give me 1 second to pull up these notes. Okay, so I only have a few minutes, and I'm not going to do a better job of explaining the paper than Stephanie just did, so let me emphasize some of the aspects that I think are important for the later discussion, and I have her looming here over my shoulder to make sure that I don't step out of line. So I think the paper asks a really interesting and important question about the mechanism that drives intertemporal correlation in altruism. It's a very important question, as my wonderful co-author on a chapter on the altruism budget, Laura G, can tell you about that. There's Laura right there. So the thing is, as we know, these are really hard questions to get at for all the typical reasons of unobserved heterogeneity, the sort of people who give in t = 1, or the sort of people who give in t equals 2. So Stephanie and Bob conduct an experiment to identify the effect of choosing to give now on giving later, using defaults to alter people's behavior exogenously. They find a big effect on round 1 giving, which tells us that their instrument, the treatment, is relevant, which is great. But the exclusion restriction is much harder. We need the treatment to only have an effect on round 1 giving, not on round 2 giving directly. So they address this by showing that using a variety of treatments in which the subjects have no choice about whether to keep the money or to donate it, and those are not different from each other, even though the default choice treatments result in different levels of giving. So their argument is not whether or not the money was transferred by you, that is to say the no choice treatments, but the actual ability to choose the decision. So we can think of another piece of evidence in support of this by Amanda Chon, who is, I think, an attendee on this, and Katie Milkman, and some other guy who's not very important. So they show that reciprocity responses to solicitation using data from hospital patients who are solicited for donation fade out quickly. And we also know that it's important to think about the mechanisms that induce giving. This merry band of co-authors found that follow-up solicitations had very different effects depending on how people were induced into giving. But the upshot is that those who were induced into giving in round 1 are more likely to give in round 2. So this is evidence that the act of choosing to give now causes more giving later. So let me shift gears and tell you about a few things that I think are worthy of further discussion, whether it's now or later in the after party. I think that's up to Blur. So I think the results from the no choice treatments are really interesting because there's no difference among them, even though in some of them the subjects were actually asked to make a choice, it just wasn't fulfilled, and in others they were asked to think about their choice. And there's no real difference, as far as I can tell, between those treatments and not even having a round 1, which I think tells us something interesting about the effects of priming. So closely related to that is something that Stephanie addressed briefly, which is how the very existence of round 1 affects decision making in round 2. I think it'd be really worthwhile to show the round 2 outcomes for all treatments compared side by side directly. Like, does having someone force you to do something in round 1, because it's not a nudge, you're being forced in the no choice conditions, affect round 2 decisions relative to at least having a choice? And I think that this can be addressed by comparing the round 2 only treatment to the no choice treatments, but it's worth delving into more deeply. So it's related to this small literature that we have on the importance of agency and directed giving and philanthropy that Catherine Eckel, hi Catherine, I know you're there, Dave Herberich and I have worked on, as well as work by some guy, Katie Milkman and Zhang. So the upshot is that that this is a really valuable contribution and a good example for graduate students and other faculty to pay attention to, because it's got a clear mapping from theory to the specific, to the econometric specification, to the experiment. It's an interesting question with broader implications for policy and our understanding of behavior, and it opens avenues for additional research that I hope we'll have a chance to discuss later. So I really appreciate the opportunity to join you guys here. As most of you know, I'm not really an experimentalist. I just play one on Zoom sometimes. So I'm glad that I got a chance to delve a lot deeper into this very interesting and enjoyable paper.
Thank you, Jonathan. Stephanie, do you want to respond, maybe using like 30 seconds or so?
Yeah, okay, so thanks, Jonathan, first of all. I know that there's lots of demands on time. Yeah, so a few things I didn't get to mention in the short amount of time that you brought up was this no difference between the hypothetical choice, hypothetical scenario, no information in round 2 only. And so if I were to compare these outcomes directly in round 2 directly to the choice outcomes, you really see, so it's hard for me to kind of summarize. If I just look at averages, not actually looking at what happens, how people choose in round 1, I see really high donation rates in round 2 in the no choice treatments in the round 2 only, relative to the choice treatments. Once I separate the choice treatments into whether they actually gave or not gave, then then we have issues of selection and lots of other problems. But then you start to see some pretty big differences. But it's kind of hard for me to get into that without my slides and my paper in front of me or a whiteboard or something. But thanks for the nice comments. I don't know what happened in the Q&A, but maybe we deal with that in the after party.
Yes, that sounds great. Thank you, Stephanie, for responding. I think we are running out of time on the first talk. Now I will have Ian introduce the second speaker.
Okay, one moment. All right, then I have the pleasure of introducing our second speaker for today, who is Mengxing Wei. She received her PhD at the University of Leicester in 2018 and is currently an assistant professor at the School of Economics at Nankai University. So thank you so much for being with us, Mengxing. We look forward to your talk, which is on gift exchange models, theory, and evidence. So Mengxing, whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Yan. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk. The paper I'd like to present today is Gift Exchange Models, Theory, and Evidence. This is joint work with Sanjay Dami and Anglia. My co-authors are not here today, and I'd like to answer your questions after my presentation. This talk is divided into 7 parts. Firstly, the motivation story. Suppose that it is common knowledge in some city that one must tip a percentage of the fare. John takes a taxi to a secluded location in the city. The driver expects John to give him a tip, which is the driver's first order belief. And John believes that the driver expects a tip from him, which is John's second order belief. Based on his second order belief, John cannot bear the guilt of letting the taxi driver's expectations down, so he pays the tip. From the previous literature of psychological game theory, this phenomenon is normally called the simple guilt aversion. Also, John gives a high tip if he believes that the driver has been pleasant to him, and this is a belief-based reciprocity. Not only this kind of story, but also in the practice, the guilt aversion and reciprocity are pervasive. To study reciprocity, gift exchange game is a nice framework. And from this story, we can see that reciprocity and the guilt aversion sometimes may simultaneously function in the player's decision making. Hence, in this paper, we'd like to use the belief-based model BGE of psychological game theory to investigate the choice of effort by workers in a gift exchange game. Additionally, we also want to compare the different models such as Akerlof 1982 model AGE and the Malmindi and Schmidt 2017 model MSGE to find which model has the best explanatory power of the workers' effort. And the main concentration of this paper is the behaviors of the workers, and we leave the problems of the firm to the future study. We mainly contributed to the literature of gift exchange game and the psychological game theory. Firstly, we simultaneously incorporate beliefs and the exogenous wage and effort norms to extend the theoretical models. Secondly, we simultaneously investigate the belief-based reciprocity and guilt aversion in the sequential game. Lastly, we use our new design experiments to examine our theoretical predictions. Let's move on to the model part. There is one firm and one worker, and the gift exchange game has 2 stages. The workers and the firms can form their initial beliefs. The firm's first order belief denoted by BF1, is the firm's expectation of the worker's possible effort, and BW1 is the worker's first order belief, which is the worker's expectation of the firm's offered wage. BW2 is the worker's second order belief, which means the worker's expectation of the firm's expected effort level from them. And the players can update their beliefs with public and private signals. There are two public signals, theta W and theta E. They could be any statistical moment of wage and effort in similar industries, or wage and effort norms according to Akerlof in 1982. And in our framework, we followed Akerlof 1982 to use the wage and effort norms for these two public signals. After observing the two public signals, the firm can update their first order belief to condition on the two public signals, theta W and theta E. Additionally, there is one private signal. We elicit from the firm a signal S of the firm's first order belief, BF1. S could be any statistical moment of the updated first order belief of the firm, and S is communicated to the informed group of workers, IG, as a private signal, but not to the uninformed group of workers. In our context, we divide the workers into two equal groups to give better comparison between their behaviors under different information conditions. Importantly, the informed group of workers is assured that the firm is not told that the signal S is communicated to them, to avoid the possibility that the informed workers suspect that the firms will misreport their first order belief for the strategic purposes. After observing these signals, the informed group of workers can update their first and second order beliefs to condition on the two public signals and the private signal S. However, the uninformed group of workers can only update their first and second order beliefs, which only condition on the two public signals. As in the standard gift exchange game, there are two stages. Firstly, the firm chooses the wage level W for the worker, and secondly, the worker observes the wage chosen and then chooses their effort. There are some assumptions on the beliefs, continuity, differentiability, and we assume first order stochastic dominance for the worker's first order belief for the MSGE model, and we assume first order stochastic dominance for the worker's second order belief for the BGE model. Next, the preferences of the workers under the AGE model. Akerlof 1982 mentioned that on the worker's side, the gift given is work in excess of the minimum work standard, and on the firm side, the gift given is wages in excess of what these women could receive if they left their current jobs. Hence, we can model the workers' utility W as the workers' material payoff, which is wage minus the cost of effort plus non-negative parameter gamma times wage minus the wage norm times effort minus effort norm. The intuition behind this reciprocity term means if the worker received wage higher than the wage norm, then they may think the firm is kind to them, and in this case, they may exert a higher effort level than the effort norm, and vice versa. From this utility function, we can see that no beliefs enter into it. Secondly, the preferences of the worker on the MSG model. Malmindia and Schmidt 2017 mentioned that the weight that player I attaches to the welfare of player J depends on the actions of J that affect I relative to the expected behavior of J. A favorable act such as giving a gift strengthens the bond between the giver and the recipient, i.e. the weight of the giver's payoff in the recipient's utility function. Hence, we model the worker's utility V as the material payoff plus, again, a non-negative parameter gamma times wage minus the worker's expected wage condition on the signals they can receive times the firm's payoff function. The intuition behind this reciprocity means if the worker receives a wage higher than their expected wage, then they may get happier in the case that the firm gets a higher payoff, and vice versa. Next, the preferences of the worker under the belief-based model. The worker's utility U equals the material payoff plus reciprocity minus guilt plus surprise seeking. Lambda R, lambda G, lambda S are three non-negative parameters. And according to the previous literature on psychological game theory, which studies guilt aversion and surprise seeking, for example, Kalmeski et al. 2015 and Dami et al. 2019, they mainly found that the sensitivity of guilt is relatively more important to the surprise seeking. The intuition behind guilt is that if the worker exerted an effort which is lower than their second belief, then they may feel guilty. And in this case, the whole guilt term is negative. The flip side of guilt is surprise seeking, which means if the worker exerted a higher effort level than the second belief, then they may feel happy from exceeding the firm's expectation. And in this case, the whole surprise seeking term will be positive. As for the reciprocity, we followed Dufwenberg and Kirchsteiger 2004, which is the kindness from the worker to the firm times the worker's perceived kindness from the firm to the worker. After some derivation, we have this final form for our case. And from this utility function, we can see that the worker's second beliefs enter into this utility. Okay, next, the experimental design. We had 10 sessions of the classroom experiments and 240 subjects attended the experiments. In each subject group, there is one firm with 2 uninformed workers and 2 informed workers. The reason that we have more workers than the firm is that the focus of this paper is the workers' behavior. Hence, we'd like to obtain more data on the workers' side. And the workers are totally independent from each other. In the experiment, the firm received a piece of a sheet containing some information and questions. The information contains the typical effort level exerted by workers in similar industries and the typical wage paid by firms in similar industries. How did we choose these 2 numbers? We checked the previous literature of the gift exchange experiments, and we found that most of them found the average effort and average wage chosen by the subjects is around 40% of the maximum rate. Hence, we also used 40% in our experiments. After observing this information, the firm needs to answer what is their wage chosen and what is the effort level that they expect the workers to choose, and the elicitation of this firm's first-order belief is incentivized. On the workers' side, they need to complete 3 parts. They only received the instructions for 1 part at a time and collected once finished, and only 1 part is randomly chosen to be paid. They cannot receive any feedback between the parts. In the first part, part A, we aim to test the relationship between effort and wage. The workers can receive the information that the typical effort, typical wage, and only the informed group of workers can know the signal of the firm's first-order belief. After observing this information, the workers need to answer the question, what is their effort choice corresponding to the different wage chosen by the firm. For the workers, we used the strategy method for all 3 parts. The reason is that we'd like to find the proportions of the workers whose behaviors are consistent with our theoretical predictions, not only the aggregate result. In part B, we test the relationship between effort norm and effort. The information the workers can receive is that the firm actually paid wage and the typical wage paid by firms in similar industries, and only the informed group of workers can know the first order belief of the firm. And then they need to answer the question, what is your effort choice corresponding to different typical effort? Similarly, in part C, we aim to test the relationship between wage norm and effort. The information they can receive is the firm actually paid wage and the typical effort. And only informed group of workers knows the firm's first order belief signal. After observing this information, they need to answer the question, what is their effort choice corresponding to different typical wage? For the time reason, I will only show you some very brief results. The first one is the summary of comparative static results. We calculated the Spearman correlation coefficients to test the theoretical predictions. The left columns of each big column shows the theoretical predictions of the three different models, and the left columns show us the experimental results. And we can see that the main conclusion of this table is that the belief-based gift exchange model has the best explanatory power, because the majority of our subjects follow their behaviors are in agreement with belief-based model predictions. Next, the determinants of effort. We run several top-bit models censored on both sides. Firstly, for the informed group of workers, the signal of the firm's first order belief and the actually paid wage are both significantly positive, and this result is consistent with the belief-based model. And for the uninformed group of workers, since they do not observe the signal of the firm's first order belief, hence we did not regress effort on belief. And we can see that wage had significantly positive effect on the effort. Let's get a quick conclusion. From our experimental evidence, we can see that reciprocity is a more fundamental feature as compared to guilt aversion and surprise seeking when we consider the pure effects of a change in wage. However, when we consider the totality of the effects that arise through various signals such as effort norm, wage norm, and the signal of the first order belief of the firm, then guilt aversion and surprise seeking add substantial value to the analysis of the workers' behaviors. Hence, the belief-based gives extreme model of psychological game theory adds significant insights to the other two models in the presence of information that directly impinges on beliefs. We can fruitfully incorporate the suggestions of psychological game theory into the traditional gift exchange hypothesis. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Mengxing, for that presentation. We'll now turn to Martin Dufwenberg for discussion. Martin?
All right. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Arizona. Let's see if I can share screen. Is that okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
I have just one slide, and I can't find it. Sorry.
The green share screen button at the bottom of your...
Yeah, but I don't see my let's see here. Share screen. my document is not showing. Anyway, okay, I guess I just have to do without, let's see, now you can see, right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. This is my
Yes,
one slide.
there we are.
So sorry about that. Okay, so I have a couple of comments here, and Maxine, I only have minutes, so I actually have more notes than this. So I will send you a separate, you know, after we're done with this, send you more comments. But my comments for the 5 minutes I have are: number one, good to see you again, Maxine. Number two, you are looking at gift exchange in this paper, and you know this is an important setting. And of course, Akerlof has, and then Akerlof and Yellin have important discussions of this going back in the 80s. And I think this work is interesting for many reasons. In some sense, it led to what I would call the second wave of behavioral economics. You know, I think it's, you can almost divide behavioral economics into a first wave, which goes back, and Kahneman and Tversky are the most important figures. You know, they focused on single individual decision making. And then you have a second wave where I think the key year is really 1993. That's the year when Fehr, Kirchsteiger, and Riedel published their experiment, essentially testing the ideas of Akerlof. And it's also the year when Matthew Rabin published his reciprocity paper. And, you know, two things differ with the second wave of behavior from the first one. The second one is more focused on strategic interaction, and it's more mathematical in style, okay? So this is my side comment on gift exchange, but you tie into all this literature, and that's really interesting. Now, there are two parts to Maxine's paper. You know, first, the authors develop theories, several theories that could shed light on why we have the more, you know, if you ask the question, why might you get gift exchange, they address that. And then secondly, they carefully develop experimental tests of these theories. It's all very, very nice. However, the overall goal of the paper in the current form it's written is stronger, in my view, than the sum of the parts. So I think if you work at it, you can improve things. And in particular, the discussion of the theories you relate to is not quite as focused as it could be, I think. So first comment about this is that you write as if you have three theories, but the last one is really two theories combined. You know, you talk about guilt aversion and reciprocity, and it's not obvious why you want to join them. And in fact, now from your presentation, there was a third motivational force in the picture, surprise seeking. And you know, it's not obvious to me you want to make a combination of all these, even if ultimately evidence suggests that each one maybe have some importance, okay? So that's the first comment. The second thing about the theory is that you claim that the last one is relating to psychological game theory. And while that is true, you know, also at least the second theory, the one which you call Malmendier-Smith gift exchange, is also psychological game theory. You know, you talk about how the motivation is that if the worker receives a gift in excess of his or her wage expectations, then he does this and that, okay? And that link to the surprise of getting more than you expected means that if you want to model it, it takes psychological game theory to do it. It may be that Malmendier and Smith don't acknowledge or write about that in the paper, but it's actually true, okay? And furthermore, now going back to Akerlof and what you call AGE, the Akerlof gift exchange, you know, often you see that discussed in such a way that people say, oh, kindness-based reciprocity, you know, ideas going back to Rabin, and that then Georg Kirchsteiger and I extended so that you can look at sequential games, you know, is often viewed as providing a kind of psycho-foundation for Akerlof's story. And if you take that perspective, since reciprocity, kindness-based reciprocity would be psychological game theory based too, you know, it's all psychological game theory. Now, the way you presented it, you actually gave a different spin to Akerlof's theory, and that's fine, but I think you need to say more and explain these things. Okay, so that's about all those component theories. Now, second last comment here, I want to clarify the role of psychological game theory. Psychological game theory is a mathematical framework. You can think of it as a broadening of traditional game theory. So it's a very broad framework. It doesn't deliver any predictions per se. And, you know, there are some instances where the way you wrote your paper, it reads as if the opposite were true. Okay, so what you should say is more like, if you focus on this and that, for instance, if you focus on guilt aversion, then you discover the need to build on this framework of psychological game theory. And you do it in different ways depending on what kind of sentiment you model. But the framework itself doesn't give you prediction, it's just a broad framework, okay? And I want to tell everyone in the audience that if you want to get, and also you, Maxine, if you want to read up on and get a good intro or an intro to psychological game theory, then Pier Paolo Battigalli and I have recently completed a major long survey, and it's titled Belief-Dependent Motivation and Psychological Game Theory. So you can find that manuscript on my homepage if you're interested. And then final point, maybe slightly provocative to everyone in the audience. I think when you do experimental work, you know, you shouldn't actually present the data. You should spend your time motivating the interesting hypotheses that you look at and the stuff you want to test, you know, and create interest that way. And even if you don't go that far, then I would propose that at least in the paper, when you write the paper, don't mention results in the introduction. You know, the introduction and the motivation of the paper will be more forceful if you just focus on talking about the ideas that you're interested in and why the design is optimal for testing the ideas. Okay. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor
Thank you very much, Martin. Perfect. So, Mengxing, we still have a few more minutes until 11 a.m. if you'd like the floor to respond, take a few questions before we move into the after party.
Okay, can I ask you a question, Professor Dufwenberg? I am not quite understand that you said Akerlof's model, gift exchange model, so can be defined as the psychological game theory context.
Yeah, well,
I don't really understand that.
So the way I have thought about it, and now from your presentation, I realize maybe I'm actually wrong here, but I've been thinking about it as Akerlof postulated that if the worker receives a higher wage, then he responds with higher effort. And he based that on psychological intuition, okay? But he didn't actually model the underlying psychology. That's how I've been thinking about it. And then, you know, a kindness-based reciprocity model is modeling the psychology, and you can ask, does it match Akerlof's intuition or not? Okay, and if you do that, then of course it would be Georg's and my model that you apply, and that's based on psychological game theory. So Akerlof would be sort of reinterpreted in terms of psychological game theory, right? Now, it may be that I'm mistaken in giving this interpretation. I don't want to put words in the mouth of Akerlof, and you present a different model, but a slightly different take where you have these wage norms, as you call them, okay? But also wage norms, when you start thinking, or effort norms and wage norm, on some level are expectations. Where are, these norms, how should we interpret them? It's statements about what others think I ought to do, something like that, okay? That's also a kind of beliefs. It kind of leads you in the direction of psychological game theory, even though you have to extend it maybe to let the beliefs be about what you ought to do rather than what you actually do. In that manuscript by Pier Paolo Bascali and myself, that I mentioned the survey, we actually have a section where we talk about social norms and the connection to psychological game theory. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And again, Maxine, I'll send you a paper with more comments. Yes.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right, so now we're moving into the after party. So the presentation section part has officially ended. In the after party, so I suggest if people in the audience have questions, if you click on the participant button, there's a raise hand function. So if you raise your hand, we'll be able to see you and let you speak. So unmute you and let you speak. So let me go ahead and read off some of the questions from the Q&A. So the first couple are about Stephanie's papers. Stephanie, I don't know whether you can see that. So Diego asked, great, one question, how much time elapsed between round 1 and 2 and when they received their payments from such rounds? And this one was later asked again by Zeyang. How long is the time interval between round 1 and 2? Can we extend these findings to longer, more realistic time intervals, such as days, weeks, or months? So really good question. Would you like to address that?
Sure. So I think I mentioned there was about 10 minutes, depending on how quickly they could work through the tasks between round 1 and round 2, between making the decision in round 1 and making the decision in round 2. This is the question I get every time I present it, which is, what would happen if we extended this to 1 week to, whatever, any other longer period of time. I think we don't know in terms of this particular experiment. It's an open question, and it's definitely something I think would be an interesting robustness check, or just an additional finding. Jonathan's paper on the habit of giving does look at a kind of a longer time period. It's obviously a really different setting and a different approach. Well, yes, but he's actually looking at a much longer period of time, with, I would say, similar findings in the sense that, there is this this habit of giving. I'm not an expert on his paper, but if he wants to chime in here. So I think there is some evidence that Jonathan gives us some evidence that perhaps it is robust to longer periods of time. In our experiment, we don't do it. I think that's the obvious next step.
John, do you want to chime in on the timing question?
I'm also not an expert on my paper because it was written like 10 years ago.
Okay.
So this was using data from a university, looking at alumni giving and looking at giving in first 5 years after graduation, so roughly early to mid 20s, and then I want to say 20 to 25 years and later after graduation. So it was the other end of the extreme for the difference in timing, and I used exogenous variation in likelihood of giving and amount given in that early time period, and showed that once you account for the unobserved heterogeneity, that it really did seem like the very act of giving created a habit. So I think we've Stephanie and I have bookended the two time spans, and but I think that there's a lot of scope for generalizing Stephanie's approach in the field, and or possibly even in the lab, just with a longer time span. I think it'd be very interesting to get a better handle on that.
Can I just jump in again? So one thing that I think comes up a lot, comes up a lot when I present the paper, when I discuss the paper, is, there's lots of, is it possible to do something like this in the field? I think it's a difficult question, right? Because we really relied heavily on restricting choice in order to establish an exclusion restriction, and to think about how you would do it in the, Jonathan has a slightly different approach with this IV, but how you would, and so maybe that's the answer. But how to do something like what we did in the field is not obvious, because I haven't figured out how I can force people to donate or force people to, keep money. It would sort of take a completely different approach. I don't think there's any way to take what we did and replicate it directly in the field. We'd have to kind of redesign, but maybe not impossible.
So an alternative framing of your first stage is it's very much like priming people in the psychological literature, which also has been used in some econ experiments. And so one question, open question about priming is, how long the effect lasts when you prime people. And I once collaborated with Margaret Shi, who's one of the major contributors of the identity priming literature in psychology. And when we designed our experiment, so the first part, they fill out a questionnaire, and that was the prime. And then when they play games, she wanted to have a screenshot to maintain the prime. So that was within 1.5 hours. I haven't seen any paper that explicitly tests how long a prime lasts, but her intuition from running these priming experiments is that it doesn't last very long. So you have to maintain it. Like between every round of the game, she wants a picture that maintains the prime. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So I can't directly answer that question, but if I think about our no choice treatments, in which they're essentially getting the same default, but then not actually having any choice over what happens in round 1, we see that essentially once they hit round 2, it doesn't matter what default they were put into. So in the context of our experiment, it really lasted a short amount of time. The default assignment itself.
Yeah. And then Alice has a question also for you, Stephanie.
Okay.
When you say an increase in altruism in A1 leads to an increase in altruism in A2, is it relative to the same baseline, or is there an increase from A0 to A1 and then a further increase from A1 to A2?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. She says I answered it within the presentation. So what I mean when I say that is that when I generate some exogenous variation in giving in round 1, I'm able to get an increase. So the how do I want to say this? The nudge-induced increase in altruism in round 1 causes the increase in altruism round 2. So this increase is coming just from the amount. This just seems like a mouthful of words, but the increase of in altruism that comes from the exogenous variation from the nudge, if that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, then maybe Alice can raise her hand again.
Yeah, she might have left. I actually don't see her on the list. Okay. All right, any other questions from the audience? All right, so if not, from the panel. Thank you. So we thanks to the speakers and the discussants. Very nice.
For me, and I do see Lisa Spuntig has her hand raised.
Okay, yeah. Lisa, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. It's a bit of an unconventional question because it actually relates to a comment that Martin made, and it was that the introduction should not contain results. And I wanted to ask the panel what the opinion on this is.
So can I comment first, just to say I have a at the top of my homepage, Peter Martinsson and I have a provocative paper that was just published in a special issue of Revue Économique, where we advocate that when you submit to journals, you shouldn't mention the results in the introduction. You shouldn't have them in the abstract. In fact, they shouldn't be in the paper. They should be in a sealed envelope, and then you take the accept, reject decision before you open that envelope. It's written a little bit provocatively, but we articulate many, and in particular one good reason for this.
Yeah, so that's the pre-analysis plan, essentially.
No, it's not a pre-analysis plan, okay? It's hiding the results from the evaluator, okay? Pre-analysis plan is meant to prevent harking, that is, picking the hypothesis after you see the data. Whereas our proposal is preventing something else, namely scientific misconduct. You don't have incentives to p-hack and stuff like that. In the extension, it also solves the harking problem because, if you want to motivate from an ex-ante point of view, you want to have the strongest motivation. Yeah. So anyway, I want to let others talk, but I just wanted to throw that out there. So if you're curious, you can look.
Okay, Ted, what do you think?
Well, actually, it's interesting that you said that because I spend a lot of time in our behavioral and experimental masters trying to impress upon our students that what we really care about is your design motivation and your justification and the research question, and we don't care what your results are. And it's actually I've been doubly having to do that because all of our students ordinarily would run their experiments in April in the lab, which they obviously couldn't do because we shut down. So now most of them are not in their dissertation, don't have data. And I've been trying to tell them that's actually completely okay, because what we really are marking you on is the quality of your idea and the rationale behind your experiment. And at the end of the day, the experiment's going to generate whatever the experiment generates. It's okay if it's, interesting. It's okay if the data are good, or the data are good or expected or not expected. That shouldn't matter. Right? It should be the thought process that goes into the experimental design that should be emphasized. And in some ways, your proposal is basically saying that as a referee, we should be marking the experimental design and the justification for it, and not then looking at, you didn't. Oh, it's a null result. And I can think of a number of times where I've been chastised by referees for reporting a null result. Where and things like, well, we ran this 2 different places and we checked to make sure that there was no big difference between them. That was part of the experimental design. We verified there was no difference. Oh, why are you bothering me with a null result? Which I think is unscientific, right? You should be checking those things.
So, but Martin's proposal is to, after you finish the paper, separate the 2 parts, right? The result part is in the envelope, is in the sealed envelope, and the referees evaluate the first part. And this is consistent with some practice that we've seen. So the Journal of Development Economics, for instance, will conditionally accept your paper just based on your pre-analysis plan.
Yes, there is a whole movement called the Registered Reports movement, which has exploded, actually. There are now hundreds of journals doing at least some tiny version of this.
Right.
I mean, I've actually been saying this for a quarter century, okay? So in some sense, I was saying this before it's in the last 10 years, this explosion has come. But the idea is good, and I've been saying it for 25 years. And you can actually find the statements back in the 60s. We cite some papers in the, that have had similar ideas. But I would qualify slightly what Ted said. Okay, thanks for supporting it, Ted. But you kind of said at some point, all results are equally important. Okay, I think you went in that direction. I would disagree with that, right? Because clearly some results are more important than others. The issue, however, concerns incentives. If you want to have good research being reported, then you don't want to incentivize on the level of the results. You want to incentivize on the level of motivation.
Yes, if I came across, to paraphrase my prime minister, if that's what you understood, I apologize.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Actually,
right. Because yes, certainly it is the case that not all results are equally interesting, to be sure. But if you've designed the experiment the right way, then the results are what they are. The world is what it is. If you've designed and motivated the experiment the right way. And yes. The fact that you don't get something what you expected, or the referee doesn't see what they prefer to have seen, perhaps from their own unconscious bias about what the result ought to be.
And in fact, I see that Catherine Eckel has written in the chat, "Amen, Ted," after your thing. And when I described like a year or so ago to Catherine our proposal. Catherine, maybe you want to comment, but you kind of rightly, I think, commented that, look, you're going to have a lot of boring papers in the journals, which is a downside, I have to admit.
Yeah, Catherine, you're on.
Hi,
so would you like to comment me on that?
I'm sure. I'm not sure this is a battle that we want our young researchers who are listening to these seminars to be fighting. That's all. So I just want to make sure that what the message is that you intend to send to the young researchers who are watching this seminar. Should they be doing this when they submit their papers, or do you think that they should pursue a more conventional approach for now?
So I think, yeah, it has to do with, we talked about descriptive norms versus injunctive norms. So I think Martin and Ted were advocating for the injunctive norm, what everybody should be doing. The descriptive norm, I think, is still, you talk about your results in the abstract, and in the introduction, you can just flip open the recent issues of the top 5 and look at how the experimental papers are written. It's also, I also want to move back to the publishing panel that we just had about 2 weeks ago in the mentoring program. We had editors and AEs and co-editors from the top 5, 4 of the top 5. And one mentee actually asked the question of, does any of the journals, would any of the journals publish a null result? It was complete silence. Nobody said we would. So I think it was a provocative question, and I think the field is not there. It doesn't mean that it's not moving in that direction. There are lots of indications that it's moving in that direction. But for our junior faculty members, I don't advocate it.
Can I say one thing about the junior faculty members here? Yeah. I think by raising and maybe exaggerating a proposal like the one I made, you end up discussing how we should evaluate things, and you partly influence referees, right? So even if the proposal is not implemented, you make young scholars think, hey, maybe I should try to take a stand on this paper as regards the quality of the ideas, and I shouldn't look at the results section. I mean, I never look at results sections when I referee papers myself, because I kind of like to impose this standard on myself, and by having the discussion, sort of give people confidence in that direction.
I think we lost John. Anybody else would like to elaborate on?
I think on the zero result question, the important thing is whether the zero result is interesting. So as Martin mentioned at the beginning, when I first was unmuted, if you just judge papers on their designs, you can end up with a lot of uninteresting papers. And of course, editors want to publish things that will get their journal a lot of citations. And so many null results are uninteresting. If you test a theory and you get a null result, then nobody may care. But there are some null results that are quite important. So for example, if you have a major policy intervention that results in a robust null effect, that's a publishable paper for sure, right?
Well,
So,
the problem with what you say, Catherine, is that once you go down that road, you know, then you create incentives for scientific conduct where people want to have the results that get published, be they null or not.
I know, I absolutely agree with you. But you can't blame editors for wanting to publish papers that will increase the citations in their journal.
No, that's why you need the sealed envelope. You need to deny them the data. They are the culprits.
They'll peek.
Yeah. No peeking.
Thank you all. Great seminar.
Okay, last call for questions. Yeah, okay, so thanks to the speakers and the discussants and everybody who participated. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Great
you.
to be here.
Thank
And
Yeah.
good luck, Maxine, especially.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, bye, thanks.